Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today is Monday, February 2nd, 2026, and I want to start by just pointing out something that feels a little strange, a little meta.
You're talking about the fact that we're talking about podcasting.
Exactly. It's a snake eating its own tail, right? You, the listener, are currently plugged into this feed, or let's be honest, about the year we're in. You're probably watching this on a screen, and you're consuming a deep dive about the very system, the architecture that allows this to even exist.
We're turning the microscope back on ourselves.
We are, and we really have to, because the word podcasting in 2026 means something completely different from what it meant 20 years ago. Our mission today is to figure out how this weird portmanteau, a mix of a specific Apple device and an old radio term, somehow managed to conquer the world.
And it really did conquer the world. It went from this tiny, almost hidden audio blogging niche for tech nerds to, as you said, a video-dominated industry. It's a wild ride.
It is. And for this, we've gone deep into the sources. We're primarily pulling from the really comprehensive Wikipedia archives, looking at everything up to 2025 to build out this history. We want to look at the name, the tech, the really vicious legal wars.
The legal wars are a story in themselves. I mean, the fact that this medium even survived the patent trolls is, frankly, a minor miracle. It came so close to being strangled in its grip.
And that's a key theme for us today, this whole idea of democratization. The open RSS feed versus the corporate gatekeepers who tried and failed to lock it all down.
It's a story of the open internet, really. But I think we have to start with the present day. We have to start with the elephant in the room.
The 4K camera staring at us right now.
Exactly. What even is a podcast in 2026? Because the old definition just doesn't work anymore.
It's functionally useless. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, let's say 2016, I'd have said, oh, it's a downloadable audio file you get through an RSS feed. End of story.
Simple, clean, technically accurate. But today, I was looking at a Bloomberg report from last year, 2025, and the number it gave was just staggering. It said 1 billion people.
1 billion with a B.
1 billion people were watching podcasts on YouTube every single month.
Think about that. That's not a niche audience. That's a fundamental shift in how people are consuming media. The primary way a huge chunk of the world experiences this audio medium is now visual.
It changes everything. The entire promise of podcasting for the first 2 decades was that it was something you did while your eyes were busy.
Right. Driving, doing the dishes, walking the dog, at the gym. It was the ultimate secondary activity. It fit into the cracks of your day. But now it's demanding your full attention. It's demanding your eyes.
And that creates this huge tension, doesn't it? A tension between the original definition, the very name podcast with its link to the audio-only iPod, and this new reality of it being essentially on-demand television.
So is it a podcast if it's just audio anymore? I mean, are you falling behind the curve if you don't have cameras in your studio? It's just old-fashioned radio at that point.
That's the big debate, and it's not just philosophical. It's having real, tangible effects on the quality of the content, especially for the people still listening the old-fashioned way.
I was reading that piece in The Guardian from, December 2025? It had a great line.
I know the one you mean. They called it painful to hear.
Painful to hear. And they're not wrong. I have experienced this so many times. I was in the car listening to a comedy show, a big one, and they started reacting to a video on their laptop.
Oh, no.
For a solid 10 minutes, it was just them laughing, pointing, saying, oh, look at that. And I'm on the highway just listening to dead air and confused giggling. I felt completely left out.
It alienates the core audience. The audio-first listener, the person the medium was built for, is suddenly an afterthought.
You feel like you're eavesdropping on a conversation you're not part of. It breaks the theater of the mind.
That's the perfect way to put it. The theater of the mind is what made audio so powerful. The host had to describe things to paint a picture with words. Now, with cameras rolling, it's easy to get lazy. You just hold something up and say, look at this thing.
And half your audience has no idea what this thing is.
So you have this huge evolution in the front end, in the consumption. But what's so fascinating to me is that the back end, the technology under the hood, is basically ancient by internet standards.
We're still running on tech from 2001.
We are. The humble, unkillable RSS feed. Really simple syndication. In a world of closed-off algorithms from TikTok and Instagram, these walled gardens, the RSS feed is like this little cockroach that just refuses to die.
I think most people who listen to podcasts probably don't even know what RSS is, or that they're using it every day. Can we just break down how it actually works?
Absolutely. It's beautiful in its simplicity. Think of it like a menu posted outside a restaurant. The generator, which is us, the creators, we maintain a simple text file on a server. That file is just a list.
Like a blog post.
Exactly. It says, here's the new episode, here's the title, here are the show notes, and here is a link to the MP3 file. That's basically it.
And our app, the client on our phone, is the customer.
The customer. So your app, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Overcast, it's programmed to essentially walk by the restaurant every hour or so and check the menu on the wall. Anything new today? No. Okay, an hour later. How about now? Oh, a new special. Great, I'll download that.
And that's the pull versus push distinction, which is so important.
It's critical. A radio tower is push. It blasts a signal out, and if you have a receiver, you get it. But the government can shut down that one tower, and the signal is gone.
It's centralized.
Very. But RSS is pull. We don't send you the file. Your device requests it from our server. It's a pull system, and that decentralization is what makes it so resilient to censorship and control.
So it's this weird converged medium. It takes the web for the text file, the audio content, and the portable player, and it smashes them all together.
It removes the friction. But before we had that, boy, did we have some failures. The journey to this point is littered with false starts.
Which brings us to the origins, the happy accident era from 2000 to 2004. This whole thing feels so inevitable now, but it really wasn't.
Not at all. It was cobbled together. If you go back to the prehistory, the year 2000, you see these early attempts like a company called i2go.
That name just screams .com bubble. It's like pets.com for your ears.
It really does. Their service was called myaudio2go.com, and the idea was actually brilliant, way ahead of its time. They let you download news stories from major sources to listen to on your PC or on these clunky early MP3 players. It was podcasting.
So what happened? Why aren't we all using i2go today?
They were just too early. The MP3 players were expensive and held like 10 songs. Internet speeds were painfully slow. They burned through all their money and were gone by 2001. But the seed of the idea was planted.
The idea of attaching audio to a data feed.
Exactly. And that's where the real tech pioneers come in. A guy named Tristan Louis first proposed the idea of attaching files to RSS back in October 2000.
Yeah.
But the person who really built it was Dave Weiner.
Dave Weiner. He was one of the authors of the RSS format itself, right?
He was. And he implemented the crucial piece of the puzzle, a little bit of code called the enclosure tag.
The magic tag.
That's the magic. It's just a line in the text file that says, hey, web browser, just so you know, there's a media file attached to this post. It's not just text. Without that tag, you just have a blog. With that tag, suddenly you have a podcast.
But Weiner was a developer. He built the plumbing, but he wasn't a content guy. He needed someone to, turn on the water.
He needed a showman. He needed a front man.
Enter the Godfather, the guy with the hair from MTV, Adam Curry.
It's still so strange to me. The father of this decentralized, nerdy medium is a former MTV VJ. You'd think it would be some radio engineer from NPR or the BBC.
But maybe that's why it worked. Curry understood pop culture. He understood content. He wasn't just a coder.
I think that's exactly right. He launched his show, Daily Source Code, in August 2004. And it wasn't just him talking about his day. It was a meta show. He would chronicle his life, but he would also talk in real time about the development of the medium itself.
He was building the plane while flying it.
And he was inviting other people to help. He'd say on his show, okay, I'm putting this MP3 file in Dave Weiner's enclosure tag. Can any of you developers out there write a script that can automatically find it and download it for me?
So he was crowdsourcing the tools.
He was, and it worked. He inspired this whole community of pioneer podcasters and developers. Because of his show, you get the first user-friendly applications, the GUIs, like a program called iPod or X by August Trometer. It was the first app that made it easy for a non-technical person to subscribe to a feed.
Okay, so you have the tech, you have the Godfather, you have the first apps.
Yeah.
But you still don't have a name for this thing. And this is my favorite part of the story.
The etymology.
Because podcast sounds so deliberate. It sounds like something Steve Jobs cooked up in a marketing meeting. But Apple had nothing to do with it.
Not a thing. In fact, the term podcast was being used in the wild long before Apple ever officially supported the feature in iTunes. They were late to their own party.
So who do we have to thank for the name?
A journalist named Ben Hammersley. He was writing a piece for The Guardian in February of 2004 trying to describe this new phenomenon. And he was literally brainstorming names in the article itself.
He threw out a few options, right?
He did. He suggested audioblogging, which is, descriptive but a bit dry.
Very dry.
Then he suggested guerrilla media.
Guerrilla media. I love that one. It sounds so much more exciting. Welcome back to the Deep Dive, a guerrilla media production.
It sounds like a pirate radio station broadcasting from a hidden bunker. A bit too intense, maybe?
Probably. So what was the third option?
Almost as an afterthought, he just mused, but what to call it? Audioblogging. Podcasting. Guerrilla media. He just threw it out there. Podcasting. A combination of iPod and broadcasting.
And it just stuck.
It stuck. A guy named Danny Gregoire started using it in the online audio blogging community. Adam Curry heard it and picked it up for his show, and within months, it was just the accepted term.
Even though it was based on a specific trademarked product from a company that was notoriously protective of its brand.
Extremely risky, but the community just ran with it. They didn't ask for permission, and that created a huge headache for the legal department over in Cupertino.
Which is the perfect segue into the pod wars, the legal battles. Because Apple wasn't just going to sit there and let a whole new medium name itself after their flagship product without a fight.
No, they were not. It started getting really aggressive around 2006. Apple's lawyers started sending out cease and desist letters.
To who? Other big companies.
No, that's the thing. They went after small fish first. There was a company called Podcast Ready, Inc., and they got a letter basically saying, hey, that word pod, that's ours. Stop using it.
Wait, hold on. Their argument was that they owned the English word pod. The thing P's come in.
That was the core of it. I mean, it sounds completely insane, but their legal argument was based on the concept of secondary meaning.
What does that mean?
It means that a common word can become so famously associated with a specific brand that it effectively becomes a trademark in that context. Their argument was that the iPod was so dominant, so world famous, that when a consumer saw the word pod in an electronics context, they would automatically think of Apple.
So they were trying to trademark iPodcast and even just the word POD by itself. They wanted to own the language of the entire ecosystem.
That was the goal. Control the language, control the medium. But the pushback from the community was massive. Bloggers, developers, early listeners, everyone screamed bloody murder.
And it was just too late, wasn't it? The horse had already left the barn.
The word was already everywhere. The BBC was talking about their podcasts. NPR was using the term. It had become generic. And I think Apple had a moment of realization.
They realized they might be about to kill the golden goose.
Exactly. They were attacking the very medium that was giving people a reason to buy iPods. If they killed the word, they might hurt their own hardware sales. It was a very delicate situation.
So they backed down, which is not something Apple does very often.
It was a very strategic retreat. In late 2006, they put out a statement. It was a masterpiece of legal doublespeak. They said they didn't object to the generic use of the word podcast to refer to the services. But they also clarified that they did not license the term either. It was their way of saying, okay, you can use it for now, but don't think for a second we don't still think we own it. It was a stalemate, but for the community, it was a huge win.
The name was safe. But Apple wasn't the only one trying to fence in the commons. The story of Shea Spencer Management is even more absurd.
Oh, this one is my favorite. This is a classic case of what we now call trademark trolling. In 2005, this LLC files an application to trademark the word podcast.
After it's already in common use. That's like trying to trademark the word internet today.
Precisely. They wanted to own the trademark for any online pre-recorded radio program. And the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, the USPTO, they basically laughed them out of the room.
They rejected it.
They rejected it. But the reason they gave for the rejection is the beautiful part. In their official ruling, they cited the Wikipedia entry for the word podcast as evidence.
You're kidding. They used Wikipedia in a legal decision.
They did. They used it as proof of prior art and generic usage. The ruling essentially said, look, this public open source encyclopedia that anyone can edit already says this term is part of history. You're way too late.
That's incredible. It's like the open web defending itself, a beautiful feedback loop.
It's perfect. But the trademark fights were, in a way, just the opening act. The main event, the fight that could have actually killed podcasting, was the patent troll.
This is the part of the story that really gets my blood boiling. The saga of personal audio.
It should. This was a company that the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the EFF, rightly labeled a patent troll. They didn't make anything. They just owned patents and sued people.
And their claim was that they had invented podcasting back in 1996.
That was the claim. They had a patent from 96 for a system for disseminating media content. Now, the original invention was about putting playlists on cassette tapes to go with magazines. It had nothing to do with the internet or MP3s.
But the language was vague enough.
The language was incredibly vague. It talked about disseminating episodic content and compiling playlists. They argued that this covered podcasting, and therefore every single podcaster owed them a royalty.
And they didn't go after Apple or Spotify. They went after the creators.
That's the classic bully tactic. In 2013, they started suing high-profile shows directly. They went after the Adam Carolla Show. They sued How Stuff Works. They picked targets that were big enough to have some money, but not so big they could afford a decade-long court battle.
That's terrifying. Imagine you're just a creator, you built an audience, and suddenly you get a letter demanding a cut of your revenue because some shell company in Texas claims they invented the concept of a series of audio files.
It was an existential threat to the entire medium. If personal audio had won their case, it would have set a precedent. Every podcaster, from the biggest network to a teenager in their bedroom, might have been legally required to pay a licensing fee just to upload an episode.
It would have completely destroyed the independent spirit. It would have turned it into a corporate licensed industry overnight.
It would have been the end, and for a moment, it looked really dark. Adam Carolla, facing millions in legal fees, decided to settle in 2014.
Which must have felt like a huge loss for the community. The troll got paid.
It did. It felt like the bad guys were winning, but the fight wasn't over. That's when the EFF really stepped in.
The heroes of the story.
Absolutely. The Electronic Frontier Foundation filed a petition with the USPTO to have the patent itself invalidated. They argued it was overly broad and that the ideas in it were not new. They started a crowdfunding campaign to pay for the legal fees and went hunting for prior art.
Proof that these ideas existed before 1996.
Exactly. And they found it. They found examples from academic projects, from early internet radio, all showing that the concept of episodic audio was not some novel invention by this one company.
And the patent office agreed.
They did. In April 2015, the USPTO invalidated the 5 key provisions of the patent they were using to sue people. They ruled that the patent was essentially worthless. It was a massive, massive victory.
It's just a huge what-if moment in internet history. If the EFF hadn't won that fight, this conversation we're having right now might not be possible, or we'd be paying a royalty to have it.
It's that significant. It kept the medium open.
Okay, so podcasting survived the wars. It survived the trademark grabs and the patent trolls. But it was still pretty niche. When did it actually go mainstream? When did it become something your parents had heard of?
The date you want to circle on your calendar is June 2005. That was the turning point.
And what happened in June 2005?
Apple released iTunes 4.9.
An iTunes update. That seems so mundane. Why was that specific update so important?
Because before iTunes 4.9, listening to a podcast was, frankly, a pain. You had to be a bit of a nerd. You had to find the RSS feed URL, which was this long string of text. You had to copy it, open a separate program like iPodder, paste the URL in, download the file, then plug your iPod into your computer and manually drag the MP3 file over.
It was like a 6-step process. The barrier to entry was huge.
It was. iTunes 4.9 changed everything. It added a podcasts directory right into the iTunes store. Suddenly, you didn't need to know what RSS was. You just browsed a directory, saw a show you liked, and clicked subscribe.
One click.
One click. And the next time you sync your iPod, the new episodes were just there. It completely removed the technical friction. It opened the floodgates to millions of regular, non-technical users.
And once you have an audience, you get stars. We have to talk about Ricky Gervais.
The first true podcasting superstar. In 2006, after the success of The Office, he, Stephen Merchant, and Carl Pilkington took their old radio show and turned it into a podcast.
The Ricky Gervais Show. But they did something really radical at the time.
They charged for it. They put it on audible.co.uk and changed 95 pence per episode.
Which seems so wild now in a world of free ad-supported shows. But it worked.
It worked spectacularly. It proved that people were willing to open their wallets for high-quality audio content, and the numbers it did were just mind-boggling for the time. By 2011, it had over 300 million unique downloads.
And that led to a little bit of a rivalry, didn't it, with Adam Carolla back in the U.S.?
A little bit of a friendly rivalry, yeah. Adam Carolla's show was also getting massive numbers, and at one point he claimed the Guinness World Record for the most downloaded podcast with something like 60 million downloads.
But Gervais's show had way more than that.
It had 5 times that. But Guinness seemed to have ignored the UK numbers, or maybe the data wasn't submitted properly. It just highlighted how much of a Wild West it still was. No one really knew how to accurately count listeners or compare shows globally.
The metrics were a
A
mess.
total mess. Is a download, listen, what if someone downloads it but never plays it? The industry is still arguing about that today.
But regardless of who held the record, by 2007 it was clear. Podcasting was doing what radio had done for decades, but without the limitations.
It was officially a disruptive medium. Radio is built on scarcity. There are only so many frequencies on the FM dial. That scarcity makes the licenses valuable, and it leads to very mainstream, advertiser-friendly programming.
But the internet has infinite shelf space.
It's infinite shelf space. You can have 1 million podcasts. That fractures the audience into 1 million tiny niches, which is a nightmare for traditional advertising models, but it's amazing for listeners.
Speaking of all those niches, let's talk about how the content itself started to evolve, because for a long time, the stereotype was just 2 guys talking about movies.
The 2 dudes in a basement trope. And look, there was a lot of that. But very quickly, people started to push the boundaries of what an audio show could be. The biggest evolution, I think, was the rebirth of the audio drama.
Fiction podcasts, movies for your ears.
Exactly. This wasn't just an audiobook with one narrator. This was a return to the golden age of radio plays from the 1930s and 40s. Full cast, sound effects, original music. It was incredibly ambitious.
And it started attracting some serious talent. The sources mentioned actors like Demi Moore and Matthew McConaughey lending their voices to these projects.
It wasn't just indie productions anymore. Major Hollywood studios got into the game. Marvel launched the Wolverine, the Long Night series, DC, Netflix, Spotify. They all started creating these high-budget cinematic audio experiences.
There was that interesting data point about the pandemic, too. When lockdown started, a lot of podcast listening went down because people weren't commuting.
Right, the drive time audience vanished overnight, but fiction podcasts saw a huge spike. Their downloads jumped something like 19%.
Which makes perfect sense. We were all trapped at home, anxious, staring at the same 4 walls. The last thing we wanted was more news. We wanted escapism.
Pure escapism. And audio can be even more immersive than video sometimes. When you're watching a movie, you see the edges of the set. In an audio drama, the monster is as big and as terrifying as your own imagination can make it.
Then there were other formats, like the podcast novel.
A really clever strategy. Authors like Scott Sigler would serialize their novels, releasing 1 chapter a week as a free podcast. They'd build up a huge, loyal audience.
And then use that audience to get a publishing deal.
Exactly. They'd go to a publisher and say, look, I have 50,000 people who listen to every episode. They're guaranteed customers if you print this book. It completely flipped the publishing model on its head.
I also remember the enhanced podcasts or slidecasts. I had an old iPod that could do that. The artwork would change to show you a picture or a graph while you were listening.
It was a great idea, especially for education. Apple even patented a technology in 2012 called audio hyperlinking. It was supposed to embed these inaudible sonic pulses into the audio.
Inaudible pulses. That sounds like something out of a spy movie.
It does. The idea was these pulses would trigger actions on your device. So a professor could record a lecture, and as they say, and as you can see on this slide, the pulse would automatically make the correct slide appear on your screen.
Why did that never really take off?
Honestly, video just got easier and cheaper. Once streaming from YouTube became ubiquitous, why bother with a clunky slidecast when you can just watch a full video of the lecture? It was a solution for a problem that bandwidth eventually solved.
Okay, so the content is evolving, the tech is stabilizing, but we have to look at the global picture. This stopped being just a North American and European thing very quickly.
It really did. The growth internationally has been explosive. You look at China, for instance. By 2023, there were over 220 million podcast listeners there. It's a colossal market.
And India is the 3rd largest market in the world.
Around 95 million monthly listeners back in 2021, and it's only grown since. But for me, the most interesting statistic is market penetration.
As in, what percentage of the actual population is listening?
Right. And the world leader there, by a long shot, is South Korea. In 2020, a survey found that 58%, nearly 6 out of 10 people, had listened to a podcast in the last month.
58%. That's incredible. The U.S. was, what, half that at the time?
Less than half. Spain also has huge penetration, around 40%. It shows how deeply embedded it's become in the culture in some parts of the world.
What's the driving force behind that? Why did it grow so big, so fast, globally?
It comes back to that low barrier to entry. To start a radio station, you need a government license, a transmission tower, millions of dollars. To start a podcast, you need a decent microphone, a computer, and some basic software.
And maybe some blankets on the wall for acoustic quieting.
The official term for recording in your closet, I think every podcaster has a closet era. It's a rite of passage.
But that rawness, that intimacy, is actually part of the appeal. That's why public figures started flocking to it.
Absolutely. The New York Times had a great piece on this in 2025. They argued that long-form podcast interviews had basically replaced the late-night talk show or the magazine cover story as the go-to place for a major interview.
Is that because it's a friendlier environment? Or because they have more control?
I think it's a bit of both, but mostly it's about the format. If you go on a late-night show, you get, 6 minutes between commercials? You tell a pre-approved anecdote and you're done. It's a performance.
Whereas on a podcast, you can sit down for 2 or 3 hours.
You can relax. You can have a real meandering, candid conversation. It feels more authentic, both for the guest and for the listener.
It creates that strange parasocial relationship where you feel like you actually know the hosts.
And that parasocial bond is the currency of the entire podcast economy. Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, the money. How did this thing finally figure out how to make money?
The great revenue puzzle. Because for a very long time, the story was that podcasting was hugely popular but generated almost no revenue.
That was the narrative as recently as 2019. Advertisers were hesitant, the tracking was poor, they couldn't be sure if people were actually hearing their ads or just hitting the skip button.
So the creators had to get creative.
They did. They pioneered new models. The most important one was probably direct support through platforms like Patreon, crowdfunding.
The buy me a coffee model.
Exactly. Suddenly, you didn't need 1 million listeners to make a living. If you had 1,000 true fans who were willing to chip in $5 a month, you had a sustainable career. It allowed for incredibly neat shows to thrive without needing a mattress sponsor.
And then came the live shows, the touring model.
Podcasters realized they had built these passionate communities who would actually pay money to see them live. Shows like My Favorite Murder or The Dollops started selling out 1,000-seat theaters. They became legitimate touring acts, like rock bands.
And so we've come full circle. We have a thriving industry. We have multiple revenue models. And we're back where we started this conversation, the video paradox.
The great blurring of the lines. Is a creator, a YouTuber, or a podcaster? In 2026, that distinction is almost meaningless.
Web TV shows are distributed as video podcasts. Vodcasts are no longer the exception. They're the norm for any big show.
We started with audioblogging, a rebellion against mainstream media, fought tooth and nail to keep it open and audio-focused, and somehow we've ended up basically creating our own version of on-demand television.
But it's still different, isn't it? The spirit of it. Even with cameras, a video podcast doesn't feel like a polished network TV show.
It doesn't. The structure is still there. The long, authentic conversation, the niche focus, it still feels like you're just listening in on 2 people in a room trying to figure something out. The cameras are just there to capture it.
So when we look back at this whole journey, from guerrilla media to a billion-user video platform, what's the big takeaway?
That the open web can win. This was a medium born from open standards, RSS, MP3s, a decentralized network. And every time a corporation tried to lock it down, the community fought back and won. Apple tried to own the name. They failed. The patent trolls tried to own the technology. They failed. It's a testament to the resilience of a simple, open idea.
And its power comes from serving the niches, the long tail that Chris Anderson wrote about.
Exactly. No TV executive in their right mind would greenlight a weekly show about, the history of concrete or mycology. But there's a podcast for that, and it can find its audience anywhere in the world and be successful. That's the magic.
It is. Okay, so I want to leave our listener with a final thought to chew on, something to mull over.
Let's hear it.
In this world we now live in, where 1 billion people are watching podcasts, have we lost something? Have we sacrificed that original magic, the theater of the mind, in exchange for more engagement and bigger ad dollars? Or have we just reinvented television, but this time on our own terms, without the suits and the gatekeepers telling us what we're allowed to make?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? I think as long as the core of it remains an authentic conversation, the medium will be fine, whether there's a camera in the room or not.
I certainly hope so. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please consider rating or reviewing the show. And hey, maybe start your own. All you really need is a microphone, a closet, and something you're passionate about. Thanks for listening.
Or for watching. We'll see you next time.